On with the program.
Welcome back to Your Health television program. I'm Dr. David Morwood. I am a board-certified plastic surgeon, and I'm so pleased you could join us for today's program. My very first guest is the illustrious Dr. Mark Vierra. Dr. Vierra, thank you so very much for being here. You were the beginner, I might say one of the founding doctors, or the founding doctor of the Center of Excellence here in Monterey for bariatric weight loss surgery. You came to us from Stanford. You're a board-certified general surgeon, and your primary interest is the gastrointestinal tract. Isn't that right, Dr. Vierra?
That's right.
Well, Dr. Vierra, I'd like to talk a little bit more about your background, and then I'd like to really get into this fascinating topic about diets and calories and eating and working off weight or exercising, etc. So tell us a little bit about what it takes to become a board-certified general surgeon with a specialist in the GI system.
So there's not a recognized specialty for GI surgery. It's considered part of general surgery, but some people who got used to doing complicated gastrointestinal surgery have sort of migrated towards that, and the field has become so big that you can't really be a breast cancer specialist and do complicated pancreatic cancer surgery or esophageal cancer surgery, for example. So the things that always interested me were the issues about nutrition and metabolism, and so I migrated towards the gastrointestinal tract, and I was never much interested in the hernias, and I never became very interested in breast cancer or things like that. But the issues about the GI tract and how it works and feeding and nutrition were always of interest to me, and so that's kind of what I have come to do.
Well, Dr. Vierra, I know you work very closely with the gastroenterologist, that's sort of a branch of internal medicine here in the county, and we're very lucky to have you. I think that a doctor with your type of training and experience is mainly found in big universities or big cities. I think we're lucky to have you.
Well, thank you.
Dr. Vierra, I want to ask you, I want to start this off by almost a statement, and which will become a question. I think for years, at least growing up, I was always interested in science, and I learned that you could take a piece of food, whether it was an apple or a piece of pie or a steak, and you could look up in a little book, and it would tell you how many calories were in that piece of food. And then we could also read about the number of calories it took for an average person or a certain weight to run a mile. For example, it burned up a certain number of calories. And we also learned that if you burned up more calories in a day than you took in, you would probably lose weight that day. If people ate more calories in a certain day than they burned up, they would probably gain weight that day. But since then, we've heard about the Atkins diet and the South Beach diet, and then some people say, well, if you consume most of your calories in the morning and you don't eat at night, you're going to lose weight. So can you help us decipher what's going on with these diets and calories? Is the calorie still an important concept?
Yeah, so it is an important concept. So let's start as physicists, and you and I are sitting here, and we're two big water heaters, and we got to keep our body temperature at 98.6 degrees. And so let's say we weigh 160 pounds, and we're trying to heat a 160-pound water heater to 98.6 degrees, even when it's cold outside. And we also have a couple pumps going. We've got a pump that runs our lungs, and we've got a pump that runs our heart, and our kidneys and our liver does a whole lot of work actually to strain and filter the blood. So we've got these processes that are going on, and that requires a certain number of calories. That requires a certain amount of energy. Now, we can't plug ourselves into a socket, and we don't photosynthesize. We get our calories. Where do we get our calories? We get our calories from what we eat and what we drink. A calorie is a physical measurement. It's the amount of energy necessary to raise 1 cc of water 1 degree Celsius, basically. So it's a measure of the amount of energy necessary to raise water a certain amount of 1 degree Celsius. And the notion that the total volume of calories that we eat and that we burn is going to determine how much we weigh is largely valid. That's largely valid. There are some certain things that we need to do to modify that concept, but in fact, none of us photosynthesize. We still got our calories from food, and to first approximation, it takes a certain number of calories to keep our heart functioning and our lungs functioning and enable us to walk out the door and to keep our body temperature up.
Well, Dr. Vierra, let's say that we can measure the caloric output or the amount of energy it takes just to keep our body systems going. In other words, if we could measure a sedentary person during the day. Now, we know that an Olympic athlete training during that day will burn up more calories. But what about a person who is just normally active, goes to work and drives a car and may walk up and down stairs a couple times a day? Like, roughly, how much difference is there between a person who's sedentary and somebody who has a normal activity?
So that's a really good question. So some people seem to never have a weight problem. They can seem to eat what they want to eat and don't seem to have to exercise and never have a weight problem. But the fact is that it turns out that about 75% of the calories we burn every day are housekeeping functions. So those are the functions which keep our body temperature up and strain our blood and keep our heart going. So that's about 75% of the calories that we burn on the average day. And the biggest predictor of the difference in calories between two individuals turns out to be not how much they jog per day, not how much they exercise or what their job is like, but how much they fidget. So it's called NEAT, non-energy activity thermogenesis, which is the amount of calories we spend moving our hands when we talk, getting up and moving around, just sort of fidgeting. And that actually turns out to be a better predictor for most people than how much we actually exercise. Now, it's certainly the case that Mark Phelps burns an awful lot of calories, and high-performance athletes may need several thousand calories to keep that up. But you know, a simple way to make yourself depressed about it is to say that one bagel might be 300 calories, and that's enough calories. That's enough calories for us to go out and jog 3 miles.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It's kind of depressing, isn't it? To imagine that you can go out and jog 3 miles and think you've done something really good and blow it all in one bagel.
Well, it's depressing on one side, but on the other side, the body is incredibly efficient at our motor activity and the mechanical things we do. It's an incredibly efficient machine. In other words, it doesn't take a lot of energy to run a mile. 100 calories, perhaps.
It doesn't take very much energy. So in the number of calories that it takes for a Lamborghini to go about 10 miles, a human on a bicycle can bike over 1,000 miles.
Okay, so that's fascinating. So can you say that again?
So it turns out that a gallon of gasoline has about as many calories as a gallon of fat. And I was just kind of curious to see, so how efficient are we compared to a machine? So let's look at a Lamborghini. A Lamborghini can go about 10 miles on a gallon of gasoline. You put a human on a bike, they can go over 1,000 miles on the same number of calories on 1 gallon of fat.
And that is amazing.
Yeah.
So Dr. Vierra, let's look at children and adolescents. I know that's a huge topic because it appears that not only is obesity an epidemic in adults, but dangerously, it appears that it's becoming more and more common in children and adolescents. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely.
So is the answer to get our children to move more, or is it the diet? Are they eating wrong, or are they just sitting down all day and watching TV? Like, what's the problem?
So both. So the problem is that we have become victims of our own success. So if you say, where in the world do we consume the most diet foods? The United States. Where in the world do we spend the most on exercise programs and gym memberships and fancy tennis shoes and fancy bikes? The United States. Where in the world do we have the most access to higher education and personal trainers and dietitians and such? The United States. And yet, despite this, we have basically the fattest society, not quite, but close to the heaviest society around. Everything that we've done has conspired to allow us to not have to move, and everything that we've done has actually enabled us to get as many calories as possible, and unfortunately often very unhealthy calories. You know, I like to think about the beef industry in the United States. In the United States, the goal is to get a steer to 1,000 pounds by 1 year of life, at which point you butcher it. How do we get it to 1,000 pounds by 1 year of life? Well, we put it on a feedlot. Now, they can still walk around on a feedlot. You know, they're not really that confined. They can still walk around. But we put it on a feedlot, and what do we feed it? We feed it honey bunches of oats. We feed it basically processed grain products. Now, our children are being fed largely processed grain products, honey bunches of oats and such like that. That's mainly what they're being fed. You know, if you look at the carbon that in our body, you can actually trace the carbon back and say that half the carbon in our body actually was derived from corn. Mm-hmm. And then our kids, they no longer walk to school. And remember how when we were a kid, our mom would come out at night and it was dark and they'd say, it's time to come in, you can't see anymore, and you come out and you're playing football in the street?
Right, of course.
Well, now the kids are inside playing football in a video game is what they're doing. So they're not doing that, and they're not walking to school. It just doesn't happen. So what we've done is we've created a society in which the easiest thing to do is to not move. We've basically built for ourselves a societal feedlot is what we've done.
Right. Well, when we look at that data and then we look at the number of adults trying to lose weight, now I started off by saying those concepts of the calorie contained in the food and how many calories you burn during the day. And then we look at diets like the Atkins diet or the South Beach diet or the grapefruit diet.
Right.
Or take this chromium supplement or this food supplement and it's going to raise your metabolism and you're going to burn up more calories. So are those valid diets? Are those valid concepts? Like, can we actually increase our metabolism? Or if someone comes to you and says they don't want surgery to lose weight, they want to lose weight by dieting and exercise, what do you tell them?
So the first thing I tell them is to put losing weight on the back burner and focus instead on actually eating good, healthy food. Would be the first thing that I would tell them. I think there's a fabulous role for actually meeting with a dietitian. You know, we tend to think of a dietitian as somebody who's going to tell us what to eat, but a real experienced dietitian, and the good experienced dietitians out there, they're going to actually ask you where you eat, what you're thinking when you eat, who does the shopping, how you organize it, all the sorts of behaviors that go into your lifestyle. All those sorts of behaviors that go into your lifestyle and why it is that you don't have time to exercise and what you might be able to do in order to do that. And that's what a good dietitian is going to talk to you about. They're not going to put you on a specific diet, to be honest with you. Now, you know, there certainly, for some individuals in particular, certain sorts of diets may be helpful. So if you're, for example, if you're a type 2 diabetic, or if you have an ethnicity which puts you at risk for being a type 2 diabetic, and you know you have these baseline very high insulin levels and you're very resistant to insulin, it turns out that you're going to do better if you're on a very low carbohydrate diet. That's actually probably true. I like to call that an insulin-sparing diet. It's a diet which actually decreases the amount of insulin that your body produces in response to a meal. Now, that doesn't have to be an Atkins diet. That doesn't have to be an Atkins diet or a South Beach diet or anything like that. But you're going to really want to get rid of the processed carbohydrates in general. So my favorite story about a processed carbohydrate would be honey bunches of oats, the most commonly eaten breakfast cereal in the United States today. Now, how can you make a good breakfast out of honey bunches of oats, which is a highly processed carbohydrate? You're going to take the honey bunches of oats, you're going to pour it in the garbage can. You don't want to touch it. No, so you're going to pour it in the garbage can. You know, put it outside. Don't let the kids or the dogs get into it. You're going to take the box, you're going to tear it up, you're going to put it in a blender with 8 ounces of non-fat milk. 8 ounces of non-fat milk has 10 grams of protein, it has 200 milligrams of calcium. You've got the cardboard in the box, which is a carbohydrate, actually. So the cardboard is a carbohydrate. Now, it turns out it's a carbohydrate which our bodies can't digest, so we treat it as fiber. So you've got your fiber, you've got your protein, you've got your calcium. So that's actually a very acceptable diet for you. But don't eat what's inside.
So when you talk about simple carbohydrates or processed food, does that look like that's like one of our enemies if we're trying to stay normal weight or low weight?
I absolutely believe that those are our enemies if we're trying to be really healthy.
But what about the cardiologist, and what about this idea of eating low fat? Now aren't there populations in the world where their diets are low fat and hence their weight is more normal and they have less cardiovascular disease and perhaps fewer GI carcinomas? Doesn't a low-fat diet seem to be healthy as well? Well,
so in general, you can show that people who are skinny are healthier. And in fact, there's a very interesting study done at NIH right now where they take people who are not overweight, they actually intentionally calorie restrict them so that they wind up losing about 10% of the body weight. They're basically considered underweight at that point, but when you look at every marker of their health, they seem to be healthier. And it doesn't matter whether it's actually fat or carbohydrate that you're cutting out. Now, it turns out that some fats are really good for you. And in fact, the fats which occur in fatty fish, the fats that occur in plants, are almost always really healthy for you. And in terms of your heart, we almost certainly should be eating more of those fats. The problem with fats is that they contain a lot of calories. So 1 gram of fat contains 9 calories, 1 gram of sugar contains 4 calories, 1 gram of protein contains 4 calories. So that's the reason we store our energy for times when there's not enough to eat as fat.
Okay, so a fatty food can be called a very high, dense caloric food.
It tends to be a highly dense caloric food. It absolutely does. It absolutely does. But it doesn't have to be an unhealthy food. If you're trying to cut out calories, it's a nice way to cut out calories by cutting out fat. But in fact, some of those fats are really healthy for us. And in terms of, and one of the things that fat doesn't do is it doesn't cause this big insulin release. Now, let's take what happens when you drink a soft drink. So Coke is 150 calories. It's basically 150 calories of high fructose corn syrup, pure sugar. All those calories are absorbed into your bloodstream within 10 to 15 minutes after you've drunk that Coke. All of them. What happens, your blood sugar goes way up, your insulin level goes way up. Insulin drives that sugar right into your fat cells, right in your fat cells. Now, if you're an athlete and you're trying to actually gain muscle, what you might do is you might actually give yourself a big carbohydrate load and give yourself some insulin and then lift weights, and that pushes it into your muscles. But that's not what most of us are doing. So you can show that big carbohydrate load actually is particularly bad. It's probably worse than 150 calories of fat in terms of what it does to our metabolism. And so to some degree, that really does matter. Now, you take 150 calories, that's an unprocessed carbohydrate, 150 calories in 3 apples, let's say, and you eat that much more slowly, and you have to chew it up, and it sits in your stomach, and it gets released over a longer period of time, and it's handled completely differently. The really good example would be juice. So 8 ounces of juice contains about 8 ounces of orange juice, Minute Maid orange juice, contains about 110 calories or so, the same calorie concentration as Coca-Cola, by the way, distributed by Coca-Cola. And let's say that you drank 12 ounces of that. That's the equivalent of 2 to 3 oranges, and yet it doesn't come with the fiber. So your body treats it like Coke. You get this huge insulin spike. You're hungry right away afterwards, whereas if you eat it with the fiber, it's handled completely differently. There are medications we give diabetics which will help actually control their diabetes, and all they do is slow down the absorption of the carbohydrates in our meals. That's all they do. And yet we can do the same thing by eating our carbohydrates more slowly, by eating solid carbohydrates, by choosing unprocessed carbohydrates that our body then has to process and break down. And we can do exactly the same thing.
Dr. Vierra, I must say, whenever you come on the program, I mean, it seems like time flies like nothing else, and we only have just a couple seconds. I want to give out your number in case somebody is interested in bariatric surgery, or if somebody wants to come to one of your lectures at Community Hospital about nutrition and weight loss. So do you guys have a website? Do you have a phone number we can give out?
So our website is montereysurgery.com, and I do give a lecture every month, and it's intended for weight loss surgery patients, but actually the first half of it isn't about weight loss surgery at all. It's about basically diet and metabolism, and I think it's really helpful for a lot of people. I think it's actually really helpful for a lot of people who are very overweight and don't know why they are overweight and feel really bad about it because of that, because it explains the biology, and there is real biology going on here that's really important to understand.
Excellent. So that's every month, and you give that lecture
first Thursday of the month, 7 o'clock at Community Hospital.
Perfect. So I want to make sure people understand. They can call Community Hospital to get information, or they can look at the website. Is it
montereysurgery.com.
montereysurgery.com. Dr. Vierra, next time you come on, I'd love you to talk about the piece that you wrote, the editorial that appeared in the recent Annals of Internal Medicine. Very prestigious, very interesting, thought-provoking editorial. I appreciate you coming on the program. Thanks so very much.
Thanks very much.
That's Dr. Mark Vierra, board-certified general surgeon here in Monterey. And once again, this is Your Health television program. I'm Dr. David Morwood. I am a board-certified plastic surgeon, and we're going to take a very brief pause for a very good cause. Thank you so much for being here.